Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Way Out is Through, episode 21, part of my daily video series of thoughts, videos, and reflections, ideas, and reflections of things that have kept me going each day. Sorry, this is like my third time trying to do this video. Every time I try to push play, some sound turns on in the background. It's a little bit later for the upload. Sorry about that, but I had a pretty busy day today, and there was another huge upload that came on the channel today, though, so if you haven't seen it yet, please go check out the long-form video for my big speech at Westminster High School. It was to almost 400 students, and it was to the entire psychology department, and it was a great time. The question and answer portion afterwards was absolutely fantastic. So please like and go check that out, spread it, and share it around. Anyway, back to today's episode. Today's episode is going to be Mike. Mike is the most important person in my life. I'd probably put him right above Becky, actually, and he saved my life on numerous occasions. So, I met Mike when I was 12 years old. He was 10. He lived in the house at the other end of the block from where I lived. And when I was growing up, my house was all crazy and chaotic and lots of fighting and lots of constantly up all night. Lots of yelling and arguing all day long, even in the peaceful times. Even when we were hanging out, we were yelling at each other. Mike's house was completely the opposite. Mike's house was really calm and peaceful. It was him and his two sisters and his parents, and they had this really big house with a big yard. And it was like 3 floors, and Mike had the whole top floor to himself. We lived up in the attic, and so we just sat up there and read comic books, played video games, and just talked about music and philosophy and science, and we discovered that we saw the world in really similar ways. We had really similar senses of humor. We had a huge love for information and knowledge, like learning new things and learning new thoughts and ideas and challenging our perceptions and trying to expand our horizons and knowledge and trying to get as many various sources as we possibly can to make sure we're as informed as possible, but not egotistically informed, that we know that we don't know everything, so we continually learn. It's very important. And so we spent our youth sitting up in his room, and instead of our normal teenage parties, instead of what normal teenagers would do, where they would go hang out and they would drink and party and get all messed up. We had a couple of those, of course, but most of our time, 95% of our parties were just Mike and I sitting around with 2 or 3 other people discussing philosophy or discussing politics or talking about comedy, talking about stand-up comedy in particular. Both love stand-up comedy. We both are devotees of Bill Hicks and George Carlin, and up in Mike's rooms where I discovered my love for Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson. I think I introduced Mike to Nine Inch Nails, and he introduced me to Marilyn Manson. And I think that we both discovered Tool at the same time. He is heavily into like industrial music, so bands like Skinny Puppy, stuff like that. Music was really important to us growing up. And Mike was always the safe spot in my world. So whenever I moved from place to place and I bounced around so much, went to so many different odd places, lived in small towns up in Oregon and small towns here in Colorado, and just moved from place to place. And I memorized Mike's parents' phone number really early on. So I always knew that anywhere I went, I could go to Mike's parents' house and that I could call him and if I needed to. Although we never really were much for phone conversations. Still to this day, not really much for phone conversations. Much bigger. Texting was huge. So now that we have texting, we do that. Or we just talk in person, because what's the point just sitting on the phone? But I basically lived at his house for a couple years without officially living there. I was just there all the time. Every free moment I had, I spent at his house because that was my safe place. So I would go ditch school and go to his house, or I would get out of school and go hang out at his house and spend there till it was time that I absolutely had to go home. Or I would just spend all week there if I could. And it was amazing. He gave me whole circles of friends. Like I've sometimes felt in my life like I lived in 2 parallel lives, because in one world I'd be like this disgusting, dirty, smelly, homeless kid, or I'd be like the evil, like almost cult leader, because I was very charismatic. People were just watching the car crash, and so I had a lot of disaster groupies. But Mike wasn't either of those. Mike was an actual friend. Mike never saw me as anything but an intellectual equal, and he always told me he looked up to me, but I always looked up to him. And we always would challenge each other with anything that came up. It was so much fun. Like, we'd come up with a new subject like mythology, and we would just get as deep into it as we possibly could and see as many various viewpoints. Religion's a big topic for us, because he got into literature when we went to college, and I've always just been fascinated by religion and theology. And so once we started delving into that, we would spend hours discussing not just religion and theology on the surface level, but how beliefs happen and why people have these beliefs. And then we would delve into the inner workings of interpersonal communication and why people hold certain ideals. And it's still to this day some of the most formative conversations I've ever had. In fact, I think some of the people who were around us in those conversations would probably say that even just being around those conversations were pretty intense. There was some people that I don't really want to call out for it on the video, Amber, that would spend a long time trying to practice to get get good enough with conversation to be able to hold her own. And she felt insignificant, or they would feel, insignificant if they could not join in. But eventually they got to the point where it was no problem and held their own just fine. So, but Mike was always the place that tried to save me. He always tried to help me. And I've mentioned before how I'm my absolute worst when I'm living in his shed and he's sneaking me out dinner, and I've been cutting my arm, cutting myself. And I mentioned that it was really powerful that he saved me even when I was about to commit a terrible atrocity. But that was by far not the only time he ever saved me. He saved my life many times. And one of the biggest is he moved me out to what finally got me out of hanging out with being under my mom's clutches, being under my family's thing, was that he moved me out of Colorado and moved me up to Kansas City when he was in college. And even though I was kind of still really hard to live with and I was a terrible roommate, he moved me out there for a year, and he did it just to save me. He multiple times, many times, he saved my life and given me a place to sleep, or all of a sudden paid bills because I didn't have money, and I'd call him up because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And even though he didn't have anything and he didn't want to help me, he was helping me because that was what he was supposed to do, because he's my best friend. And he's the uncle to my kids. He's a better uncle than any other uncle they ever had. And he's just, like I said before many times, he's the one person that if he ever got mad at Becky and called her a name, I'd have to be like, well, baby, what'd you get mad at her about? Or what'd you do to make him call you a name? And so I just want to say that Mike, if you're watching this, which by now you probably aren't, because he doesn't like watching gushy shit about himself. So I just want to say thank you for everything, and my whole family loves you, and you know that. So Lakshmi, you're probably the one who watched this all the way through. Thank you for marrying Mike. Lakshmi is Mike's wife, and she's a beautiful, amazing woman. And so thank you for marrying Mike and just putting up with his cranky, cantankerous ass. So anyway, I love you all. Thank you for love and support. Please like and subscribe. Smash that notification button down below. Make sure to spread this around. And like I said before, please watch that other long-form video with the talk with the students at Westminster High. I'm really proud of it, especially the part with the question and answer portion afterwards. Some of those questions were really intense and really went really deep, and I'm just really proud of it. So I would love any feedback you have for that. And I'm not quite sure what tomorrow's episode is going to be, but I'm going to have another one for you tomorrow. So I love you, and as always, you are not alone.